Hi everyone, and welcome back. We are joined again by Scott Ritter, a former U.S. Marine officer and a UN weapons inspector. So, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
I really want to discuss with you the new turn for Washington in terms of how to engage with Russia in this proxy war. Because after having all these efforts to promote a diplomatic solution, that is first with the Trump's meeting with Putin and thereafter with the Europeans, we now see that the rhetoric from Trump has changed a bit. He will now send over 3,000 these Iran medium-range missiles to Ukraine. There's talk of sanctions, and of course that Ukraine should go on the offensive. Again, one never knows how much is just for consumption for the domestic audience and what is an actual escalation. But I guess as a weapons inspector, what do you make of the this, we'll call it a threat or a warning or a commitment to send these 3,500 missiles to Ukraine?
Well, I think it's important that we link it with the post that Trump made prior to this announcement, which insinuated that, under Joe Biden, Ukraine wasn't given the ability to attack Russia, and therefore you can't defend yourself properly if you can't attack Russia. And the implication of this is that he was considering giving Ukraine the means to launch offensive operations against Russia. And then suddenly we had this announcement about the 3,200 ERAM missiles, ERAMs. And so you put two and two together and you say, well, there it is. Donald Trump is now giving Ukraine the ability to launch offensive operations against Russia in an effort to level the playing field, so to speak. Except that's just not what's happening. It's a bunch of hot air and no substance. When you take a look at the announcement, first of all, it's, it's we are considering, or we will, or we may, or something. It's not. There's no hard contract signed with Ukraine as of yet. Two, you look at the prime contractors involved and just go dig in. One of them, has a $34 million contract to develop a single prototype missile. A single prototype missile. The delivery date for this missile is October 2025. That's next month. So they don't even have a prototype built yet. Now, once that prototype's built, then they'll begin operational testing and to make sure that it meets the parameters, et cetera. And then you have to build all the, support equipment that goes with the prototype. You can't build it before the prototype because what are you building it for? And then once that's all done and it's approved for production, the maximum output when the whole production line is up and running is 1,000 ERAMs a year. Now, remember, they haven't started serial production yet. So ask yourself how many ERAMs Ukraine's going to get this year. And the answer is none. How many are you going to get next year? I don't know. If they get the production line up and running, less than 1,000. And so in order to get 3,200, we're into the 2029 time frame. So there it is. It's all hot air. It's typical Trump. It's typical American support for Ukraine. A lot of talk, a lot of big words, a lot of, drama, but zero substance here. There's no ERAM missile today. The prototype hasn't been completed yet. They haven't tested it, and it's not in serial production. So where does that leave us? Well, with the Russians continuing to launch offensive operations against Ukraine and on the ground and in the air, and Ukraine having no means to respond effectively to that. And by the time the ERAMs are made available to Ukraine, there probably won't be a Ukraine.
Well, the reason why many would have been concerned, of course, is it is very possible, as you suggest, that this is just hot air, and well, it seems very certain, given that they don't have it actually in production. But the concern for many is that once the war enters its final stages, the Ukrainian army begins to collapse, that there would be some panic and I guess escalation, which hasn't really been thought through. What do you see happening on the battlefield at the moment, and how do you expect the different Western powers to react if, I guess, things go very bad very quickly?
Well, what we see is Russia is continuing to exert pressure all along the front, the line of contact with Ukraine. Um, in some areas, the Ukrainians continue to hold out. In other areas, the Ukrainians don't. But the bottom line is, even when they hold out, the Russians are able to outflank them, threaten them with encirclement, and then the Ukrainians have to withdraw under fire. Um, just yesterday, just doing a rough count based upon the Russian um, you know provided data from the line of contact, Ukrainians lost over 1,200 men. Now, this has been on the line of contact. This doesn't include the forces that are struck by the Russians using their drones into the depth, the strategic depth. The Ukrainians are on pace to lose 2,000, 3,000 men a day. It's unsustainable. They don't have the ability to replace those numbers. Even if you were able to throw people off the streets, these aren't trained people. Putting them into a highly complex war, you just guarantee there will be even more casualties. So this is where we're at. There are still Ukrainian forces that can put up competent resistance, and this continues to be a very high intense, modern conflict. But the Russians are prevailing across the line of contact. I want to remind people that the bloodiest month for American forces during World War II was April 1945, the last full month of the war. This is when the German army had all but been defeated in retreat, but the Germans were able to defend and to launch, localized counterattacks. Despite the fact that the Americans had the initiative all across the battlefield, if you gave the Germans an opportunity, they'd knock your teeth in. And if the Russians give the Ukrainians an opportunity, the Ukrainians will knock their teeth in. It's a deadly war. The Ukrainians have shown themselves to be very adept, battle-worthy opponents. But heroism alone doesn't win the day. You need numbers, you need logistics, you need command and control. You need all the things that the Ukrainians don't have. So the Russians, are winning. Then in the air, it's not even a contest. Ukraine lacks the ability to provide concerted air defense over strategic targets, important targets, and Russia is able to just pick them off at will. Um, and you combine these two factors, and it's just it spells doom for Ukraine. What's going to happen? Nothing. I mean, what is Europe going to do? The Europeans just acknowledge they can't put troops into Ukraine. They don't have any troops to put into Ukraine. And if they did have troops to put into Ukraine, they can't support them logistically. Um, it's just a pipe dream. Europe can't do anything without America backing them up, and America's not going to back them up. Not on this. So I think what you're going to see a lot of gnashing of the teeth, a lot of pulling of the hair, a lot of bold statements made by, politicians who, better take a look in their rearview mirror because their political base is crumbling in each one of their respective countries. I don't see Macron, Starmer, or Merz lasting much longer. The German economy is in free fall. Great Britain's on the verge of open revolt, and France isn't much better. And these are the people that are supposed to rally and somehow build a viable European army. We know they don't have a European army. That's why um, I think von der Leyen said in a recent speech that the Ukrainian army is the first genuine European army. Really? Because we trained them, we equipped them, and now we have to know how to use them properly. Gosh, I mean, how would you feel to be a Ukrainian knowing that you're dying for some European dream and it's not about Ukrainian sovereignty, it's not about Ukrainian independence or, Ukrainian democracy or anything about Ukraine at all. You're simply a tool built by the Europeans that the Europeans will use and abuse to suit the interests of Europe, not Ukraine. This is the reality. Europe can do nothing. There is nothing Europe can do anything with. Russia's victory is inevitable, and it's going to occur on terms that will be acceptable to Russia.
So how do you make sense of the rhetoric from the Europeans, because they are still speaking about, NATO membership, security guarantees, they want reparations. Also, Ukraine can still win, but even as they're saying we have to send troops into Ukraine, we're ready. Once the statements are made from the EU, you had, I think it was the German defense minister who came out and said, well, the EU doesn't have a mandate to send troops. The Americans won't provide the backstop. And even if all of this would work, we don't really have the troops. So how do you make sense of what the Europeans are doing at this moment? Is this, well, it doesn't seem very authentic, or it doesn't seem very likely that they could carry through any of the things they're threatening with. But meanwhile, they're sucking out all the oxygen in the room in terms of being able to present an actual favorable settlement, something that actually addresses the security concern of the opponent as well, and something that could address the root causes which Russia keeps addressing. But if they do know that things will be much worse tomorrow than they are today, how do you make sense of any of this? Because I often make the point, I understand the Russians, they see this as an existential threat. I understand the Ukrainians, they can lose their nation over this. I can understand the Americans wanting to get some distance from this, but I have a very hard time understanding the European position now.
Well, I've looked at it over and over again, and I can only come up with one logical answer. And that is that the European political and economic elite have been operating under the umbrella of American protection and American security guarantees and American economic backup for decades now. And they cannot exist without the United States backing them up. They know no other mode. They're incapable of acting as a sovereign entity, with genuine independence. So when you have politicians who came into political maturity, operating under certain assumptions that had been true for decades, when these assumptions are no longer viable, such as the guarantee that America will always back you up. I mean, look, from the European standpoint, you and I can scratch our head and say, what are they doing? They're buying time. Why? Well, they had to buy time once before. Remember, this isn't Donald Trump's first rodeo. It's his second. And his first rodeo, Europe, working with the American establishment, ran the clock out on Trump and prevented Trump from doing any permanent, lasting damage. Then Biden came in, and Biden gave Europe everything they wanted except, final closure. But, he got the Europeans to commit to this Ukrainian conflict put both feet in. I mean, he got the Germans to allow him to blow up a pipeline and destroy their economy. He got them to, buy American gas at 3-4 times, the price. And Europe seemed to be happy about this because it's not about the well-being of Europe. It's about the viability and sustainability of European political and economic elites. This is the environment in which they can survive. And so what they're doing now is they're confronted with Donald Trump again, changing the game. They're opting not to change the game, to ride the clock out, to wait Donald Trump out. And they don't have to wait till the end of his term. They have to wait until midterm elections. You see, if the Democrats, if the opposition can take control of at least one house of the Congress, Trump is now paralyzed. And then the Europeans just have to play the waiting game, and they'll kill as many Ukrainians as possible as part of this waiting game. But that's what their plan is right now. They think they can wait Trump out. They think that they can continue to stick to a hardline position that, is more fantasy than fact. Um, and they also know that if they deviate from this, should they become reality based, their political future is over. Because then, you know, why did they do what they did? Why did they destroy their respective nations? Why did they destroy the concept of European unity? Why did they destroy NATO? Why did they kill so many Ukrainians? There won't be any tolerance for these leaders, and they'll be thrown out. And for a politician, that's the kiss of death. You become a politician because you want, fame, fortune, and everything that goes with it. You know, you don't become a politician to resign honorably and go off gently into that good night. But these people wouldn't go off gently into that good night. There's probably criminal charges that could be brought to bear, um, political retribution. They're fighting for their existential lives. So this is an existential struggle for Europe, for the European political and economic elite. Should they do the right thing and try to save lives and promote peace, it's over for them politically. And for a politician, that's the kiss of death.
Yeah, that's always a good question. What happens after this proxy war is over? Because a lot of political capital has been invested in this, a lot of money, a lot of weapons. Yeah, it's very difficult to imagine going back to the way things were. But meanwhile, on the other side of this, the Russians, they don't seem to be looking to wait out Europe and the US in this in terms of hoping to restore relations later. Instead, they seem to be moving on kind of quickly to reorient their economy to the east. I assume you've also been paying attention to what has been happening in China with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting. How significant do you think this is in terms of shaping the new world to a large extent influenced by the Ukraine war as well?
What's interesting, I often write on issues pertaining to energy security, and I remember a couple years ago when China and Russia floated the idea of this kind of massive energy deal. I said, "This is game, set, match. It's over for Europe. Once Russia gets locked into China, they don't need Europe, and Europe doesn't bring Russia anything." And I remember all of the my European counterparts and American counterparts. No, Russia will never. This is just on paper. This deal will never be closed. The conditions can never be met. Russia will never walk away from Europe. And I said, "Well, yeah, they will. I mean, because the West will continue on the current policy trajectory that inevitably results in the necessity of Russia and China concluding this relationship." Well, we're here. It happened. It's over. I mean, I don't know what Europe thinks is going to happen, but the day of Europe having access to, Russia's energy reserves to be the cheap energy for Europe, it's over. Russia's now committed to providing this resource to China, and this means that China's economy now is secure from any Western energy intervention. They don't need to worry about, strategic shipping lanes and things of this nature. They have a pipeline coming straight across. And hey, how'd you like to be Mongolia? Because what a deal. The pipeline goes across your territory and you just are making billions of dollars of free money. Money Ukraine used to make, being a transit for energy. Um, this is very troublesome for Europe because, ironically, what's going to happen is that this Russian gas is going to go to China, and China's going to load it up on giant LNG ships, and they're going to transit them all the way around the world to Europe, who's going to buy them at 5 times the rate that China purchases that. That's the end of the journey of the European economy. So this is a very big deal, and it's not just this one deal, though. Basically, it's Russia, China, and now India coming together to create a sanction-proof economic reality. The dollar is the global reserve currency. Its days are numbered now. Donald Trump really, truly blew it. Um, and we're getting to the point of no return, meaning that once China, India, and Russia, you know, head far enough down the path of independence from the dollar, they're not gonna go back. I mean, even if the United States today said, "Hey, all restrictions on dollar usage is finished. You can use the dollar any way you want to. No banking restrictions. Just use the dollar, please." Um, I think the Chinese, the Russians would definitely say, no, thanks. We're because we understand what you have the potential of doing, and we're going to make sure you never again have that potential of strangling our respective economies. And I would imagine that India might jump on board too, because you know this was not a well thought out policy to hit India with these energy tariffs for the so-called crime of buying Russian energy. So Donald Trump is I'm not an economist, but reading what people are saying about the bond market and rising interest rates and we are looking at the collapse of the economic system that held the rules-based international order together for decades, and what's going to replace it? It's a fair question.
Yeah, well, for me, not only was it this trilateral, China, Russia, India coming together closer, that is, but also the deals, well, you hinted towards the energy deals, this Power of Siberia 2 deal, which they signed, that people don't seem to appreciate how massive this is. This is uh, just yeah, ton of gas going from Russia to China, but it's not even from the eastern parts of the Asian parts of Russia. It's from the Yamal region in the Arctic. This was and gas which was intended to go to Europe to fuel European industries for decades, and now well, as the Germans celebrating that the Americans destroyed their pipeline, the Russians are now shipping everything to China, and this won't be any reconsideration. These are like 30-year contracts, so it's no, it's quite extraordinary. It's I think what's difficult to appreciate in Europe is that in the 90s the idea was let's construct a Europe where Russia doesn't have a seat at the table, but it's floating around the periphery. It still have to do as it's told, even though it doesn't get a say. And now they left, and it's I don't think people appreciate what a loss this is. But on the American side, though, it looked like the war that Trump was he saw what was coming and he wanted to turn things around. But this America First, this appears to be running into some problems. People are, first of all, defining what America First actually means, because now apparently it can mean anything. But do you see Trump still aiming to resetting the Russian U.S. relations fundamentally in terms of getting over it, like a century of conflict and yeah, I guess reconceptualizing the entire relationship, or is this just a little pause because Russia's winning the war? How are you? I mean, it's a difficult thing to read Trump, but how are you seeing yeah, the possibility for the Americans and the Russians to overcome some of their historical hostilities?
Well, I'm always loath to answer on behalf of the Russian people or the Russian nation or the Russian president because I'm American. But having been to Russia and talked to them and more importantly, listened to them, um, I would say that the Russians view stability with America as a giant plus, but it's not the kind of thing that they will compromise to achieve. The United States and Europe have pushed Russia into a new set of circumstances. Russia has become, you know, largely self-sufficient in many of the products that it previously required access to Western markets to acquire. Um, Russia has redefined its relationship with China. It has truly pivoted to the east. It now is going to be, bringing in significant revenue that will enable Russia to, you know, do the kind of continued infrastructure investments and reinvestments into business to offset, again, the gap created when the West withdrew from Russia. But Russia doesn't need the West to survive. Would they like to have normal relations with the West? Of course they would. It's never not been their goal. And this is why Russia leaves the door open to President Trump. Um, but Russia's not going to compromise to bring Trump through that door. If Trump wants to come through that door, then Russia says there will be mutually beneficial opportunities for us both. but opportunities that will be pursued on our terms. Meaning we're no longer subservient. This is not the decade of the 90s. You don't get Boris Yeltsin back. So they're patient. I think the Russians also understand serious opposition that exists in the United States to Donald Trump's policies, and they know where this opposition is coming from. It's not just long-range sniping done by the Democrats, but it's close-in fighting done by the deep state and by his own cabinet. I mean, Marco Rubio is a well-known Russophobe. He hasn't changed his stripes. He is opposed to any kind of deal with Russia, and he will sit there and look glum and nod his head when Trump speaks, but then he will be conspiring behind the president's back, conspiring with other like-minded Russophobes. Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury, um, is one such person whose only vocabulary seems to exist of two words: tariffs and sanctions. That's it. That's the strategy he employs. Keith Kellogg continues to, hide around on the periphery of providing horrible advice. Um, but, more importantly, where does he turn for his expert email, who Tulsi Gabbard apparently revoked her security clearances along with 36 others recently, who used to be the national intelligence officer, um, responsible for Russia, who was the one overseeing the politicized national community assessment about Russian collusion with Donald Trump back in January of 2017. She was the person briefing Donald Trump about Russia the day before he went to Alaska. I mean, she's horrible. But the entire CIA is full of similarly horrible people about Russia. Our academic institutions only know how to produce Putin haters. They don't know how to produce Russian experts. Um, who does Trump turn to? Aaron Lucas is the deputy to Tulsi Gabbard at the director, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Again, a longtime Russophobe. Man was the chief of station of a former Soviet country right before he took this position. You don't become the chief of station of a former Soviet country because you're friends with Russia. You're doing it because we're trying to, create chaos in Russia along the periphery. This man is a chaos creator. This is what he does for a living. And now he's the number two guy and the op director of national intelligence. Yes, Tulsi is doing the right thing by exposing Russiagate and exposing, the perfidy of the Russia expert class in America. But you know, we we don't have a replacement for them. I mean, there's not a team B out there that's recognized in the American system as, being able to provide expert advice that, can enhance, replace, the advice that Trump's getting from the class of deep state Russophobes. So this is the big problem because where does Trump turn for reinforcement? I mean, he has J.D. Vance, who I believe is on his side. He has Tulsi Gabbard, but she has to play a very difficult political, she lives in a difficult political reality. John Ratcliffe hates the Russians. There's nobody else on his staff. I mean, RFK Jr., but he's been minimized. He's doing health issues. That's it. He's not doing Russia issues. There's not a team of people up there backing this president up, and this president, at the end of the day, doesn't know enough about Russia inherently to formulate his own fact-based position, so he's dependent upon the advice given to him by the Russophobic class of so-called experts. And until they're purged, until they're replaced, this president is going to be heavily influenced by them. The Russians know this. They're very aware of all of this. And as I said, they're willing to leave the door open. It won't be Russia that shuts the door. It'll be Donald Trump that shuts the door, and the Russians hope that, that time, that day will not come.
Yeah, this is a similar problem in Europe. That is, I think most people recognize if you want economic prosperity and security, you do have to have proper relations with the largest country in Europe. But But on the other hand, you can't do anything rational because everything is considered to be pro-Russian. So it's not possible to take this political position. But this infighting in the United States, though, is kind of interesting because you're more or less describing one group with the Cold War mentality and the other group, which is clearly in a minority, who wants to reconsider, essentially the bilateral relations, look for common economic interest, arms control, some geopolitical alignment, so Russia doesn't tilt too heavily towards China. But but let's say, as said before, the European strategy is just to wait out Trump. How much is Trump changing permanently here? I mean, can NATO anymore have a proper role after this war is over?
I don't believe so. I mean, let's parse it out a little bit. Trump, is taking credit for compelling NATO members to raise their defense spending from 2% GDP to 5% GDP. A lot of people say, well, that's just, doubling the size of your defense budget. No, 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 no. We're talking about GDP. So basically they're talking about, you know, carving money out of a finite budget and where are you going to get this money from? Because you're at the point now where these nations have been balancing their military budgets for decades. They have, other budgetary issues out there that deal with pensions. They deal with, healthcare. They deal with, social safety nets, et cetera. And in order to meet this requirement for 5% now, they have to go in and gut these established programs. This is politically devastating. And it's economically devastating. It threatens society, as a whole. So w- there's a lot of talk about building, large armies, et cetera, but how? With what? And what military resources? I mean, where's their defense industrial base? Non-functioning, non-existent in any meaningful fashion. So what, Europe is supposed to buy all American weapons? Well, we don't have a defense industry capable of providing these weapons in a timely fashion. Um, so I think, this talk about an expanded NATO is just absurd. NATO is finished. NATO is done. As we're talking about, the unity of Europe, let's just keep the following reality in mind. There's two other military alliances that are being developed on European soil involving NATO members. One is an alliance between the Croatians, the Albanians, and the Kosovars. And they've created this alliance because they are opposed to the Serbians, the Slovakians, and the Hungarians. So here we have these two new military alliances being created right there in the heart of Central Europe. Um, how's NATO going to deal with that? Because, two of the three nations in each side of these new alliances are NATO members. Is NATO going to go to war against itself? Look at Hungary right now. Um, basically, they're having economic warfare declared against them by Ukraine, and Ukraine's being backed by the European Union and NATO. So Ukraine, a non-EU member, uh, engaging in existential level economic, hybrid warfare against Hungary, and they're being backed by Europe and NATO instead of Europe and NATO backing Hungary. This doesn't lead to unity, not at all. So I just see Europe unable to fulfill any of the promises, any of the pledges that they're making today. They truly is a toothless tiger.